So now that we've produced some ideas from our interpretation, the next stage for us is to come up with a thesis and contention. And we do this first because it's going to encapsulate the key arguments that we have as our body paragraphs. And now, how do we actually come up with a thesis and contention? Well, the first thing that we do is use what we have here to launch off and produce some thesis or overarching statements that capture our beliefs or our viewpoints in relation to the prompt itself. So then we can really start from any particular keyword. And what we can do here is, well, let's think about, let's treat knowledge and education pretty much as one here. But now thinking about the other keywords, power, possession of resource, ability, skills, perspectives that enable something to be achieved. Well, then what we can sort of think about is, and also consider, right? How does knowledge, right, produce, or we could also say, how does knowledge / education produce power? Or we can say, confer, grant power to, and then linking it to what we've got here, the individual / society. So we're coming up with questions, and then answering those questions can give us an opportunistic thesis and contention. And so what I mean by this is say, well, if we answer this question, what I mean by this is answering this question in a way that solves what's happening is or can be the thesis and contention that we have. So I'll demonstrate what I mean by this. Well, how does knowledge education confer or grant power to, let's just pick one. Let's just say we are going to go with the individual. So you can say, okay, individual development is facilitated by the acquisition of new, say, facts, ideas, skills. Well, let's not be that specific given its intention, its contention. So we can say is facilitated by the acquisition of new knowledge that broadens the perspective, of the individual when it comes to physical improvement. Yeah, physical improvement. We will start with this. So you see, what's happening here is that using that information that we've gotten from the interpretation, right? We're using that as a springboard to think about, this prompt, and getting us to be critical of, what can we sort of get from the prompt? Well, we've firstly gotten the idea that power in these forms can give us progress in these particular ways. So then obviously we can think about, well, how does that actually happen? Okay, so asking ourselves questions and answering them should give us a particular thesis or contention. And this is something that we can go for. Personal development is facilitated by the acquisition of new knowledge that broadens the perspective of the individual when it comes to physical improvement. Now, that's not by any means a perfect contention, but it is one direction you can take it. And then the key thing is that I've kept it broad here. Your key arguments will then talk about and support this particular contention. And so we can continue this progress. What are the things to consider from this topic that we can, when we sort of engage upon it, produce a thesis and contention? Well, we can think about, well, here, liberation, removal, management, address of barriers. Well, we can also think about, well, in the same way, how does knowledge education liberate and address barriers? And we can say, as we've also discussed before, individual or societal barriers, right? And what we can also think about is another follow-up question, which is, does knowledge / education require anything else to help it address barriers as well. So can you sort of see now we're exploring the topic a bit more now? So in interpretation, what we are doing is, broadening our workspace, having a look at, what are the cards at play. And now in idea generation, we're now forming our hand, right? And we're now trying to make our moves in terms of, all right, what information do we have? How can I use it to, give me a clear line or direction of thought, and thereby giving us a contention. That's what we're doing in this stage. And I framed it as particular questions that we need to answer to produce contention and thesis that we can use. And so something to also consider then in terms of progress on the individual and societal level is, okay, are there any situations where education slash knowledge can't produce progress? If so, why? Right? And that can also make us think about, okay, well, education is the premise for progress. Well, are there any situations where there is a lot of education, but something's stopping it? If so, why and how it is the beneficial effects of education being suppressed? And here, if we were to answer this, we might say, oh, okay, education slash knowledge cannot exert its beneficial reformative effects without in an maybe let's say socioeconomic, no, in a social environment that does not prioritize you can say learning as a cultural value, perhaps, right? And so you see here, when we answer a question, we're now producing another line of thought that we can take as our contention. And so to illustrate this further, what I put for my key points, well, we can say, all right, our key points support the contention. So what supports this? Well, we can say in a political environment marked by unrest, conflict, war, education slash learning is simply not a priority within that nation situation. Yeah. And then we can also say, right, what other ideas support this fact that education requires the right social environment? Well, maybe cultural values come into play. Cultural slash familial values also dictate the priorities of people. So what I mean by this is, if people are more focused on industry and working, they're less likely to, get the benefits of education and knowledge. And so I hope you can sort of see already that everything that we consider, right, every question that we ask ourselves and trying to answer in ourselves produces a thesis or a contention that we can work with here. And, I'll demonstrate this even further. I'll continue to demonstrate, provide more example questions, and we can think about, well, what are some adverse consequences of education slash learning? And this is a difficult question because, but it's an important one to consider because if we're being critical, this is all about the benefits of knowledge, information, and education. So naturally, would it not be useful to consider what are some adverse consequences? And to answer that, we can say, well, maybe time commitment, expenditure of individual slash societal resources, and we can also think about, in terms of outcomes, right? Outcomes in terms of power, liberation, and progress. I want to also consider, can the adverse consequences of education / learning be predetermined. So what do I mean by this? So what I'm trying to think about or consider is there anything that can sort of shape education for people? Because this is saying that education produces A, B, and C. Well, what can, how can education be changed to produce instead of A, B, and C? We might think about X, Y, Z. That's sort of what I'm asking here. And so what can we actually say? Well, we can say, well, who controls the education? Well, educational institutions. Who controls the educational institutions? Well, I suppose there are, you know, in Australia at least, probably a national board of some kind that determines the content. But what if that wasn't the case, right? What if it was in a different nation who is perhaps a bit more authoritarian? How does education change there? So then asking ourselves, does education exert the same effects in different political environments is also something to think about. And so then if you were to say perhaps come up with the idea that and so answering this, so what I'm trying to say is in answering this question, education only exerts its beneficial effects in a politically libertarian nation, which does not seek to control the thoughts, behaviors of its people. That could be a contention that we can think about. And it's all come from, just engaging with what we've produced here, asking ourselves questions, being critical about, what the topic is about. That's the kind of engagement that we need. And I guess for another video, I will sort of make sure to discuss what exactly does it mean to be critical when it comes to engaging with the prompts, because that's what's necessary to generate unique and important ideas that give you a lot of room to work with when it comes to generating an essay. So I hope that's been helpful in terms of, if you're stuck thinking about contention, thinking about some key arguments, this is what you can do. Now, I don't recommend this as something that you would do in the actual exam itself. Ideally, this should be the approach that I'm demonstrating to you is really but a learning exercise so that you can aim for the goal of being able to autonomously do all of this in your mind and within time conditions. So if anything, I intend this to be a step up approach. This is sort of starting with the basics, okay? So there, if you have any questions, feel free to comment and let me know what you think.